We appreciate each and every one of you. We'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now let's get into today's story. The crystal tumbler felt weighty in Daniel Ford's hand as he savored his evening whiskey, a small treat for finalizing the $200 million waterfront project deal. The amber liquid shimmered under the dim hallway light as he walked past his daughter's room, ready to share the good news with 17-year-old Ava. But her voice, low and conspiratorial, stopped him in his tracks. "Dad's so clueless, Lucas." Ava's words cut through the wooden door. "He actually thinks Mom's upset about him traveling so much." Like, seriously? Mark's practically living here when Dad's away. Daniel's grip on the glass tightened. The ice clinked softly, a sharp sound in the sudden stillness of his thoughts. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. Ava's giggle twisted something in Daniel's chest. "Mom says once Dad's inheritance comes through, we're all moving to New York for a fresh start." The whiskey turned sour on his tongue. Elena, his wife of 12 years. The woman he trusted to help raise Ava after Carla's passing. The same woman who'd pushed him to take more business trips this past year, who'd insisted he focus on expanding Ford Enterprises. Mark says the timing has to be perfect. Ava's voice dropped, now carrying an air of importance that made Daniel lean in closer. Once they have control of Ford Enterprises, the board won't have any choice but to approve the harbor project. She paused, her voice turning darker. Not that it matters, the environmental impact study was all faked anyway. The glass nearly slipped from Daniel's fingers. Mark, not just any Mark. Mark Davis, the EPA director who'd fast-tracked the harbor project's approvals. The same man who had been oddly agreeable to every request, every delay. Daniel pulled back from the door, his mind racing through every conversation, every meeting, those timely inspections, the way Elena always seemed to know the status of his projects, the questions she'd ask about his father's health. Moving silently down the hallway, he reached his office, placed the untouched whiskey on his desk, and pulled out his phone. Not to confront. Not yet. First, he needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal. 3 calls later, his investigator, Ben Parker, was on his way to the office. "I need everything," Daniel said calmly. "Every meeting, every phone call, every document that's crossed my father's desk this past year." "Your wife's activities too?" Ben asked, his voice measured. "Especially those." Daniel's gaze fell on the family photo on his desk. Elena, Ava, and himself. All smiles. All lies. "And Ben, I need the real environmental data for the harbor project. The actual studies, not the ones that were submitted." Ben hesitated. "This could get expensive, Daniel." "Money's not an issue," Daniel replied. He opened his laptop and accessed the offshore accounts he'd set up after Carla's death. "What matters is discretion. No one can know we're looking. Especially not Ava." After ending the call, Daniel poured himself another drink, drained it quickly. The familiar burn didn't quite match the cold fury swelling inside him. Elena hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd turned his daughter, threatened his company, and endangered everything he had built. But she made one critical mistake. She thought she was dealing with a man who was broken, someone too absorbed in business to notice the rot in his own home. She didn't know about Sophia, about the backup plans he'd set in place after Carla passed. She didn't know that Daniel Ford had learned long ago never to put all his power in one place. The next morning, Daniel stuck to his routine with practiced precision. Breakfast with the family. Coffee while Elena discussed her ideas for redesigning the living room. A kiss goodbye as he left for work. But instead, he met Ben in a private room at the Metropolitan Hotel. "It's worse than you thought," Ben said, laying out surveillance photos. "Every business trip you've taken in the last 18 months coincided with EPA inspections at your project sites." Daniel studied the photos. Elena and Mark at hotels, restaurants, his own home. But it was the timestamps that told the real story. These meetings, Daniel tapped a photo, they're all planned around board votes or regulatory deadlines. "They're organized," Ben confirmed. "Your wife didn't just fall into this affair. She went after Mark Davis on purpose." More photos. Elena meeting with other EPA officials. Mark with competitors who had mysteriously withdrawn their bids for key properties. The harbor project isn't their first target, Ben continued. They've done this before, different cities, different companies. Mark moves in, finds a vulnerable executive, and Elena provides the weakness. Daniel finished the thought. His voice was steady, but his eyes were like steel. What about my father? Ben paused. That's where it gets interesting. I spoke with his nurse, Carla Diaz. Elena visits every Wednesday afternoon. I know. She brings him magazines, keeps him company. She brings papers, legal documents disguised as medical forms. Your father's signature is on transfer authorizations, board resolutions. Daniel's fist slammed onto the table, the first sign of his unraveling composure. He's dying of cancer, and they're using that too. He stopped, taking a deep breath. What's their endgame? Control. Ben pulled out more files. Once your inheritance clears, you'll own controlling interest in Ford Enterprises. But these transfers your father's been signing? They're setting up a network of shell companies. On paper, you'll have the power. In reality, Elena and Mark will control everything. Daniel stood and moved toward the window. Below, New York's financial district buzzed with activity, unaware of the betrayal unfolding within its shadows. And my daughter? She's been their eyes and ears. Every time you've worked from home, every private call, she's been reporting back. Her trust fund isn't just generous, Daniel. It's being managed by one of Mark's shell companies. Daniel's reflection in the glass revealed no emotion, but his words were ice. They've turned my child into a spy. There's one more thing. Ben pulled out a final file. Your first wife's accident? I found some inconsistencies in the original investigation. Daniel turned slowly. Carla's death wasn't random? I need more time to confirm. But Ben's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. Your wife just accessed your father's medical records. She's moving faster than we expected. No, Daniel said quietly. She's moving exactly as I need her to. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Thomas? It's Daniel Ford. I need to see my father's lawyer. Tonight. The law offices of Brandt and Associates cast long shadows in the New York twilight. Daniel sat across from Gerald Brandt, his father's lawyer of 30 years, watching as the older man reviewed the documents Ben had provided. Gerald removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. Daniel, this is systematic corporate theft. These medical forms your father signed? They're transferring control of key subsidiaries to offshore entities. Can it be reversed? Some of it. But Daniel, there's more. Gerald pulled out another file. Your daughter's trust fund? The one Elena insisted on setting up last year? It's structured as a corporate holding company. Once these transfers are complete, Ava will technically control 30% of Ford Enterprises' voting rights, which Elena will control until Ava turns 25. Daniel's voice was cold. They're using my daughter as a corporate pawn. Exactly. And with Mark Davis's position at the EPA, they can push through the harbor project approval, tank the company's value, and walk away with millions, all while destroying everything my father built. Daniel stood and walked to the window. The city lights blurred into a constellation of betrayal. What they don't know is that I've been expecting something like this. Not this exactly, but something. Gerald raised an eyebrow. The Geneva account? After Carla died, I learned the hard way that trust is a luxury I can't afford. Daniel turned back to the desk. Show me everything they've signed, everything they've moved. I need to know exactly what pieces they think they control. For the next hour, they traced the web of deception. Shell companies nested within holding companies. Offshore accounts linked to seemingly legitimate businesses. And at the center, the harbor project, a development that would generate millions on paper while destroying the local ecosystem. The real environmental impact study, Daniel said finally. Where is it? Gerald opened his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. Your father had it conducted privately months ago. The results? They're devastating. Daniel, if this data becomes public, the company would survive. Barely. But the criminal charges for submitting false environmental data. Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those would be harder to overcome. What are you planning? Justice, Daniel replied, taking the envelope. But first, I need you to draft new papers, transfer documents, board resolutions, everything they've done. I want parallel versions, all legitimate, all ready to file. You're going to trap them with their own plan? No. Daniel's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. I'm going to let them think they've won. Then I'm going to show them what a real corporate takeover looks like. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. Elena will be home soon, expecting to find me drunk and angry about the deal closing. Instead, she'll find dinner reservations and champagne. You're celebrating? I'm setting the stage. Daniel grabbed his coat. They think they're destroying my life. I'm going to let them think that until the moment I destroy theirs. As he left the office, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Ava. Coming home late, Dad. Study group with Zoe. He texted back, no problem, sweetie. Love you. The words tasted like ash, but Daniel Ford had learned long ago that revenge, like business, required a perfect poker face. Let them think they were winning. Let them think he was blind. Geneva was waiting. And unlike Elena, Daniel knew the value of patience. In his car, he made one final call. Ben, I need you to find out everything you can about Ava's friend Zoe. Something about that connection doesn't feel right. The pieces were in place. The game was set, and Daniel Ford had no intention of being the fool they thought he was. Elena Ford's morning began like any other day of entitled luxury. She sipped Dom Pregnant at her favorite salon while scrolling through property listings in New York's Upper East Side. The text from her American Express concierge was the first ripple in her perfectly curated world. Mrs. Ford, we're unable to process your annual membership renewal. She dismissed it as a technical glitch until her platinum card was declined for a mere $12,000 handbag at Bergdorf's. The sales associate's smirk made her blood boil. Try this one, Elena demanded, slapping down her private black card. Declined. Each successive card met the same fate, her face burning hotter with each rejection. Her phone buzzed. Mark Davis's name flashed on the screen. Emergency. Office. Now. She found him in his EPA office, the usual arrogant swagger replaced by barely contained panic. Spread across his desk were documents she never expected to see in the light of day. He knows. Mark's hands shook as he held up the divorce papers. Not just about us? Everything. Elena snatched the filing from his grip, her practiced poise crumbling as she read. Daniel hadn't just filed for divorce. He'd submitted comprehensive federal whistleblower documentation. Every falsified environmental study, every manipulated inspection, every bribed official documented with a precision that made her stomach turn. Impossible, she hissed. We controlled every variable. The real studies were destroyed. Apparently not. Mark pulled up his banking app. All my offshore accounts are frozen. Federal investigation pending. Even the Cayman transfers are locked. Elena's phone lit up with notifications. Their joint accounts drained. Her private accounts frozen. But it was the alert from her daughter's trust fund that made her manicured nails dig into her palms. All holdings converted to Ford Enterprises shares. That son of a bitch, she snarled. He's turned everything into worthless paper. Once this environmental data goes public, we'll be ruined, Mark finished. And that's if we avoid prison. Her lawyer called next. Elena had always enjoyed the way Andrew Porter cringed when she berated him. Not today. Mrs. Ford, the FBI. She hung up, her hands shaking. Where would he go? She demanded. Daniel doesn't just vanish. He's too arrogant, too controlling. Mark handed her a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. Daniel's precise handwriting carried a message that chilled her more than the empty accounts. Check the real environmental impact data. What game is he playing? Elena's voice rose to a pitch that would have embarrassed her in calmer moments. No game. Mark's face had gone ashen. This morning's mail brought subpoenas for every project I've overseen in the last 5 years. Daniel didn't just run. He orchestrated a symphony of destruction. Neither noticed the small red light blinking on Mark's office phone, recording every panicked admission for an FBI surveillance team. In the parking garage below, Maria Torres, known to them only as Walter Ford's nurse, sat in an unmarked car with her FBI radio. Subjects are in place, she murmured, recording everything. The next 72 hours became a masterclass in systematic destruction. Every attempt to access funds triggered deeper audits. Each call to corporate contacts revealed blocked access. Elena's carefully cultivated network of influence crumbled like the facade it had always been. You don't understand, she snapped at her fourth lawyer in 3 days. I need those accounts unfrozen now. Do you know who I am? A soon-to-be defendant in a federal fraud case. Andrew Porter replied with newfound spine. Every transaction attempt creates new evidence. You're doing their job for them. Then discredit him. Elena's composure shattered. Mental breakdown, creative accounting, whatever it takes. That's what I pay you for. Not anymore. I'm withdrawing as counsel. Porter's tone shifted to one she'd never heard him use: honesty. This isn't just environmental fraud. Money laundering. Conspiracy. Corporate espionage. Find a criminal defense attorney. Mrs. Ford, you'll need one. The line went dead. Elena hurled her phone across her marble-floored living room, shattering. A crystal vase from her wedding. She stared at the fragments, remembering Daniel's face as she'd opened that gift. Had he known even then? Had he seen through her? Her phone buzzed from among the crystal shards. Ava! Mom! Her daughter's voice carried an unfamiliar edge. Something's wrong. I tried warning Mark about the FBI, but my calls... You did what? Elena's blood ran cold. On your phone? The one your father. She caught herself too late. The one Dad what? Steel entered Ava's voice. Did you know my phones were tapped? That every call I made trying to warn Mark just became evidence. Ava, listen carefully. No, you listen. The teenager's voice cracked with fury. The FBI just showed me transcripts. Every conversation. Every time you and Mark used me to spy on Dad. My trust fund? It wasn't for college. It was payment for gathering intelligence. We were protecting you, Elena tried. Your father's projects would save it. They're asking about Sarah too. Dad's first wife? The accident that wasn't an accident. The line went dead, leaving Elena alone with memories she'd tried to bury. Sarah's death had been before her time, but she knew the organization had arranged it, just like they had arranged her chance meeting with Daniel afterward. A grieving man, a sympathetic shoulder. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Mrs. Ford. A woman's voice, clinical in its professionalism. Agent Catherine Martinez, FBI. Let's discuss your Tuesday visits to Walter Ford's nursing home. Elena sank onto her imported silk sofa. The nurse. The weekly visits. The papers. The hidden camera footage is particularly interesting, Martinez continued. Would you like to come in voluntarily? Or should we send a car? Special Agent Catherine Martinez watched through one-way glass as Elena Ford's carefully constructed world dissolved into orange polyester and fingerprint ink. Beside her, Emma, her daughter. Her ace in the hole shed her teenage persona like an outgrown skin. Ava's asking questions, Emma reported. About me. About everything. She's starting to piece it together. Catherine studied her daughter's reflection in the glass. At 17, Emma had already mastered skills that had taken Catherine years to develop. You got closer than any other agent could. Daniel's evidence, combined with your recordings. It's bulletproof. It's bigger than Elena and Mark now, Emma said. Ava's talking. Names. Dates. Other projects. She didn't understand what she was part of, but she remembered everything. Like father. Like daughter. Catherine's voice softened. This case had cost her daughter something precious, perhaps her last chance at a normal teenage friendship. Daniel's handler is bringing him in from protective custody next week. Phase 2 begins. In another interview room, Ava Ford sat surrounded by transcripts of her own betrayal. I didn't know, she repeated, mascara tracing black rivers down her cheeks. About Sarah. About any of it. I thought Mom loved him. Agent Thomas Chin, Daniel's FBI handler, studied the girl who had unknowingly helped expose a decades-long conspiracy. Tell me about the first time your mother introduced you to Mark. The real story. Ava's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes. It was before Dad's Seattle trip. Mom said Mark was an old friend, that he needed help fixing some environmental problems. She said Dad was too focused on profits, that sometimes good people had to bend rules. She stopped, fresh tears falling. She made it sound noble, like we were saving something instead of destroying it. And Emma, Sean kept his voice gentle. When did she enter the picture? Last year. New girl at school. We connected. Ava's voice broke. Was any of it real? Was she just another lie? Chin glanced at the mirror, knowing Catherine was listening. Emma Martinez made a choice to help stop some very bad people. Just like your father did. Just like you're doing now. My. Ava looked up, eyes red, but finally clear. Where is he? Is he safe? He's safe, Chin assured her. And when this is over, you'll understand why he had to disappear. Why he had to let you think he'd abandoned everything. In her office, Catherine reviewed Daniel Ford's latest transmission. Pages of account numbers, shell companies, offshore transactions. A decade of corruption mapped with architectural precision. But it was the last page that caught her eye. A photograph of Sarah Ford on her wedding day, smiling at a future she'd never see. Her secure line buzzed. Martinez. Geneva's ready. Daniel's voice carried the calm of a man who'd waited 20 years for this moment. Time to show them what a real conspiracy looks like. Catherine smiled, thinking of Emma's sacrifice, of Ava's tears, of Sarah's photograph. Elena thought she'd married a businessman. She'd actually married an architect of revenge. Someone who'd spent 2 decades designing the perfect trap. Now that trap was ready to spring, and Catherine Martinez had a front-row seat to what promised to be the most elegant demolition in FBI history. In his secure location, Daniel Ford closed his encrypted laptop and studied his own copy of Sarah's photograph. Almost done, he whispered. Almost done. The Chicago Tribune's front page dominated every newsstand across the city's financial district. Environmental scandal claims another. Below the headline, a photo showed Mark being led into the federal courthouse. His once pristine suit replaced by prison orange, his trademark arrogance shattered by 3 years of investigation. In a secure interview room, Ava Ford reviewed transcripts of her own recorded conversations. At 20, she carried herself with a hardened grace that came from surviving betrayal. Gone were the designer clothes her mother had used to buy her loyalty. Instead, she wore a simple black blazer and slacks, practical armor for practical times. Special Agent Thomas Chin set another stack of files on the table. Walk me through the trust fund payments again. When did you first notice the pattern? Junior year, after Dad's Seattle project? Ava's fingers traced the deposit records. $10,000 appeared after I told Mom about his private calls. $20,000 after I forwarded his emails. She paused, her voice hollow. She called them performance bonuses for helping protect the environment. Chin nodded, opening a folder filled with surveillance photos. Your mother was systematic. Each payment coincided with specific information leaks. I was so stupid. Ava's laugh held no warmth. The amounts kept growing. $50,000 after I installed her special software on Dad's home office computer. $100,000 when I started recording his board meetings. She picked up one of the photos, Rebecca at a charity gala, arm in arm with another CEO who'd later been indicted. How many others were there before Dad? We've confirmed 3 other executives. All development companies, all with major environmental projects. Chin spread out more photographs. Your mother spent years perfecting her approach. Find a vulnerable target, usually a widower or recent divorcee. Establish an emotional connection, then slowly compromise them through their children. Like she did with me, Ava whispered. You were different, Ava. You fought back. Your testimony has helped us unravel corruption cells in 12 states. Across the building, Rebecca Ford sat in her own interview room, orange jumpsuit clashing with her still-perfect manicure. Federal prosecutor Diana Hawthorne reviewed notes from 3 years of investigation. Let's discuss the Marina project timeline, Hawthorne said. When did you first target Harrison Shaw? Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. You make it sound so calculated. Harrison was grieving. I provided comfort. Like you provided comfort to James Anderson in Seattle? Or Michael Chun in San Francisco? Hawthorne slid more photographs across the table. Both widowers, both with teenage children, both running companies with major environmental projects. Just a coincidence, Rebecca said coldly. What about Sarah Shaw's accident? Still claiming that was a coincidence too? For a moment, Rebecca's mask slipped. That was before my involvement. I simply followed the established protocol. Protocol from whom? You know I won't answer that. Her composure returned. But I will say this. Harrison was supposed to break. They all break eventually. She gestured at her prison uniform. Well, you can see how that turned out. A commotion erupted in the hallway. Ryan Blackwood, being escorted to his sentencing hearing, caught sight of Rebecca through the door's window. His face contorted with rage. You promised me protection, he shouted, struggling against his guards. You said the offshore accounts were untraceable. Mr. Blackwood, his lawyer, attempted to intervene, but it was too late. She planned everything. The fake studies, the bribes, Sarah Shaw's death. It was all Rebecca. She's been running this operation for years. As guards dragged him away, Rebecca's carefully constructed defense crumbled under the weight of Ryan's desperate accusations. The private banking floor of Credit Suisse exuded old-world discretion, from its mahogany panels to the hushed conversations in multiple languages. Harrison Shaw sat across from Anton Mueller, the bank's chief of private client services, watching as a vault sealed for 2 decades was finally opened. The documents remain exactly as you left them, Mr. Shaw, Mueller said, placing a weathered leather portfolio on the desk, though the FBI's authentication request was unusual. Special Agent Catherine Martinez observed as Harrison opened the portfolio. Inside lay the fruits of 20 years' patience. Photographs, account ledgers, trading records, a meticulously documented trail of corruption. But the true prize was a single USB drive containing every original environmental impact study his father had commissioned. Walter Shaw was thorough, Martinez noted, examining a particularly detailed series of photographs showing Rebecca meeting with known environmental crime figures. He tracked them for years. My father understood patience, Harrison replied, his voice void of emotion. He sorted through 2 decades of evidence, knowing they'd try again after Sarah. He just needed someone they'd underestimate, so he let them send Rebecca. Knowing he'd already established the Geneva account, recognizing their pattern when it emerged, Harrison allowed himself a small smile. They thought they were corrupting another grieving executive. They didn't realize they were walking into a 20-year trap. The evidence from Geneva went far beyond Rebecca and Ryan. It exposed a network of corrupt officials spanning multiple agencies, compromised environmental projects across 3 continents, and a web of shell companies that made the Marina project look like a high school science experiment. This is just the beginning, Martinez said, reviewing account numbers that led to more prominent names. With these records, we can track the money all the way to the top. That was always the plan, Harrison said as he closed the portfolio. His once pristine suit replaced by prison orange, his trademark arrogance shattered by 3 years of investigation. In a secured interview room, Lily Shaw reviewed transcripts of her own recorded conversations. At 20, she carried herself with a hardened grace that came from surviving betrayal. Gone were the designer clothes her mother had used to buy. Her loyalty. Instead, she wore a simple black blazer and slacks, practical armor for practical times. Special Agent Thomas Chin set another stack of files on the table. Walk me through the trust fund payments again. When did you first notice the pattern? Junior year, after Dad's Seattle project? Lily's fingers traced the deposit records. $10,000 appeared after I told Mom about his private calls. $20,000 after I forwarded his emails. She paused, her voice hollow. She called them performance bonuses for helping protect the environment. Chin nodded, opening a folder filled with surveillance photos. Your mother was systematic. Each payment coincided with specific information leaks. I was so stupid. Lily's laugh held no warmth. The amounts kept growing. $50,000 after I installed her special software on Dad's home office computer. $100,000 when I started recording his board meetings. She picked up one of the photos, Rebecca at a charity gala, arm in arm with another CEO who'd later been indicted. How many others were there before Dad? We've confirmed 3 other executives. All development companies, all with major environmental projects. Chin spread out more photographs. Your mother spent years perfecting her approach. Find a vulnerable target, usually a widower or recent divorcee. Establish an emotional connection. then slowly compromise them through their children. Like she did with me, Lily whispered. You were different, Lily. You fought back. Your testimony has helped us unravel corruption cells in 12 states. Across the building, Rebecca Shaw sat in her own interview room, orange jumpsuit clashing with her still perfect manicure. Federal prosecutor Diana Hawthorne reviewed notes from 3 years of investigation. Let's discuss the Marina Project timeline, Hawthorne said. When did you first target Harrison Shaw? Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. You make it sound so calculated. Harrison was grieving. I provided comfort. Like you provided comfort to James Anderson in Seattle? Or Michael Chun in San Francisco? Hawthorne slid more photographs across the table. Both widowers, both with teenage children, both running companies with major environmental projects. Just a coincidence, Rebecca said coldly. What about Sarah Shaw's accident? Still claiming that was a coincidence too? For a moment, Rebecca's mask slipped. That was before my involvement. I simply followed the established protocol. Protocol from whom? You know I won't answer that. Her composure returned. But I will say this. Harrison was supposed to break. They all break eventually. She gestured at her prison uniform. Well, you can see how that turned out. A commotion erupted in the hallway. Ryan Blackwood, being escorted to his sentencing hearing, caught sight of Rebecca through the door's window. His face contorted with rage. You promised me protection, he shouted, struggling against his guards. You said the offshore accounts were untraceable. Mr. Blackwood, his lawyer, attempted to intervene, but it was too late. She planned everything. The fake studies, the bribes, Sarah Shaw's death. It was all Rebecca. She's been running this operation for years. As guards dragged him away, Rebecca's carefully constructed defense crumbled under the weight of Ryan's desperate accusations. The private banking floor of Credit Suisse exuded old-world discretion, from its mahogany panels to the hushed conversations in multiple languages. Harrison Shaw sat across from Anton Mueller, the bank's chief of private client services, watching as a vault sealed for 2 decades was finally opened. The documents remain exactly as you left them, Mr. Shaw, Mueller said, placing a weathered leather portfolio on the desk, though the FBI's authentication request was unusual. Special Agent Catherine Martinez observed as Harrison opened the portfolio. Inside lay the fruits of 20 years' patience, photographs, account ledgers, trading records, a meticulously documented trail of corruption. But the true prize was a single USB drive containing every original environmental impact study his father had commissioned. Walter Shaw was thorough, Martinez noted, examining a particularly detailed series of photographs showing Rebecca meeting with known environmental crime figures. He tracked them for years. My father understood patience, Harrison replied, his voice void of emotion. He sorted through 2 decades of evidence, knowing they'd try again after Sarah. He just needed someone they'd underestimate, so he let them send Rebecca. Knowing he'd already established the Geneva account, recognizing their pattern when it emerged, Harrison allowed himself a small smile. They thought they were corrupting another grieving executive. They didn't realize they were walking into a 20-year trap. The evidence from Geneva went far beyond Rebecca and Ryan. It exposed a network of corrupt officials spanning multiple agencies, compromised environmental projects across 3 continents, and a web of shell companies that made the Marina Project look like a high school science experiment. This is just the beginning, Martinez said, reviewing account numbers that led to more prominent names. With these records, we can track the money all the way to the top. That was always the plan, Harrison said as he closed the portfolio. 13 years into her 30-year sentence, with all appeals exhausted, Rebecca Shaw's arrogance had finally crumbled. The isolation wing where she resided, a consequence of multiple attempts to manipulate other inmates, offered ample time to reflect on her downfall. Her last visitor had been 3 years ago, a federal prosecutor seeking information about other members of her organization. Rebecca's attempt to negotiate had backfired spectacularly when they revealed they already had everything they needed from Ryan Blackwood. Ryan, her former partner in crime, had broken completely. Serving his 25-year sentence in a medium-security facility in Colorado, he'd turned state's evidence against everyone he'd ever worked with. His cooperation had helped unravel corruption cases in 14 states, though it hadn't reduced his own sentence. The last Rebecca heard, Ryan spent his days in protective custody, jumping at shadows, convinced that former associates would eventually reach him. His fears weren't entirely unfounded. 3 other members of their former network had met suspicious ends in various prisons across the country. Meanwhile, Shaw Developments had not only survived, but thrived. Harrison's exposure of the corruption ring had ironically positioned the company as a leader in environmental compliance. Under his leadership, they pioneered a transparent approach to development that set new industry standards. The Chicago Business Journal's latest profile of Harrison Shaw painted a picture of redemption and innovation. The article sat on Rebecca's metal desk, its headline a daily reminder of her failure. Shaw Developments leads Green Revolution. CEO Harrison Shaw receives Presidential Environmental Award. The photo showed Harrison at the White House ceremony, distinguished in his 50s, still handsome but harder somehow. Beside him stood Lily, now 30, a federal prosecutor specializing in environmental crimes. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. The daughter she tried to corrupt had become a weapon against everything she'd built. Emma Martinez featured in the article too. After graduating from law school, she joined Lily in the Justice Department. The friendship Rebecca had tried to exploit had evolved into a formidable legal partnership. Together, they'd secured convictions in some of the largest environmental fraud cases in history. Catherine Martinez had retired from the FBI, but her legacy continued. The task force she'd helped create had expanded into an international operation, tracking environmental crimes across borders. She still consulted occasionally, especially when Shaw Development's expertise was needed to unravel complex corporate fraud. The old nurse, Maria Torres, the undercover agent who documented Rebecca's manipulation of Walter Shaw, had received a commendation for her role in the investigation. She'd gone on to train other agents in long-term undercover operations, using the Shaw case as a template. Walter Shaw hadn't lived to see Rebecca's sentencing, but his foresight had changed environmental law enforcement forever. The evidence he'd accumulated, combined with Harrison's strategic patience, had exposed corruption at every level of regulatory oversight. The file Harrison had kept in Geneva didn't just end Rebecca's organization. It sparked investigations that reached into corporate boardrooms, regulatory agencies, and even Congress. Each conviction carried a piece of Walter Shaw's legacy, a testament to one man's dedication to justice. Sarah Shaw's death had finally been officially ruled a homicide, though the actual perpetrators remained elusive. The cold case unit still received anonymous tips occasionally, each one meticulously investigated. Harrison had never stopped searching for the whole truth about his first wife's murder. In his office at Shaw Development's new headquarters, a model of sustainable architecture, Harrison kept an updated wall of photographs. Sarah and Walter remained central, joined now by newer images. Lily receiving her law degree, Emma, and Catherine at FBI award ceremonies, the dedicated team that had helped rebuild the company. The original environmental impact study from Geneva had been donated to a law school's environmental crimes division, used to train future prosecutors in detecting corporate fraud. Its findings had helped establish new standards for environmental review, turning Shaw Development's darkest hour into a catalyst for industry-wide reform. Lily's personal life had taken an unexpected turn. She'd married David Chin, son of Agent Thomas Chin, creating another bond between the families that had exposed Rebecca's crimes. Their 2 children would never know their grandmother except as a cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. The trust fund money that Rebecca had used to buy Lily's complicity had been channeled into a foundation supporting environmental whistleblowers. Each year, it helped expose new crimes, protect new witnesses, and ensure that other families wouldn't face the same corruption that had nearly destroyed the Shaws. Emma had declined to follow her mother Catherine into the FBI, preferring to fight environmental crime from the Justice Department. But she'd inherited Catherine's instincts. Her current investigation, still confidential, suggested that some of Rebecca's old associates had started rebuilding their network. Harrison watched these developments with careful attention. The photograph he'd kept hidden, the one showing Rebecca with a figure whose identity could shake environmental oversight to its core, had finally served its purpose. The investigation it sparked was proceeding quietly, methodically, with the same patience that had brought Rebecca down. In her prison cell, Rebecca had one final reminder of her defeat. The commissary television occasionally showed news about Shaw Development's latest environmental initiatives. Each broadcast was a testament to what she'd failed to destroy, a company that had emerged stronger, more principled, and more successful than ever. She'd written to Lily once, years ago, attempting to manipulate her daughter one last time. Lily's response had been simple: a copy of her federal prosecutor's badge and a note reading, "Justice finds its own path." Ryan, in his separate prison, had deteriorated further. His attempts to write a tell-all book had been blocked by the courts, his remaining assets seized for restitution. The brilliant EPA director, who'd once commanded respect through fear, now commanded nothing, not even his daily routine. The Marina Project site, the development that had triggered Rebecca's downfall, had been transformed into an environmental research center. Scientists there studied the ecosystem she tried to destroy, their work funded by penalties paid by convicted conspirators. Harrison's patient vengeance had rippled far beyond Chicago. Environmental crime units worldwide now studied the Shaw case, learning how corruption could hide behind corporate veils and family ties. Rebecca's methodology had become a textbook example of how not to succeed in corporate crime. The scale of justice that Walter Shaw had first set in motion had finally balanced. His son had transformed a personal vendetta into systemic change. His granddaughter prosecuted crimes he'd first documented. And somewhere in Geneva, in a quiet bank vault, other evidence weighed proof that some legacies of justice span generations. Rebecca had one final decade to serve, assuming good behavior, something she'd never managed to maintain. Ryan had 15 years left, his cooperation buying him little mercy from judges who'd seen the full scope of his crimes. Their invisible masters had largely escaped justice, but their power had been broken. And in his office overlooking a cleaner, more vigilant Hanoi, Harrison Shaw kept planning, kept watching, kept building. The photograph in his desk suggested there was more work to be done, but he had learned from his father that justice requires patience, and from Sarah that some debts demand a lifetime to repay. The environmental impact study in Geneva had started it all, but it was the impact of truth, slow-moving but unstoppable, that had finally written an ending even Rebecca couldn't corrupt. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.